I am interviewing Eleanor Vivian Warnke Reiber, and Eleanor is spelled Eleanor, and Warnke is Warncke, and Reiber is Riber. And I'm at her home in Owen, Wisconsin, and the date is November 13th, 2009, and I am Louise Rasmussen-Oshevsky. And we'll be talking about her life and family in schools and community life. Eleanor, would you start out telling us where you were born and about your early life in Paris?
I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, June 13th, 1914.
Your parents' names were?
My father's name was Fred Joseph Warnke, and my mother was Amelia Koplitz Warnke. My father was born in the Sheboygan area, my mother born in the Oshkosh area.
What occupations did your parents have?
Well, my mother was a homemaker, and my dad, farmer and a cook. He loved cooking mostly. It was too bad that he couldn't have just made that his life's vocation.
Did he have a restaurant?
Oh, yes.
Where was that?
In Owen, where the Owen post office now is. It was a big restaurant, and he was doing very well. But circumstances came up where his wife's folks needed help, and they insisted that they farm. And my father left doing what he loved doing to become a farmer, and it was hard.
Did he have some experience cooking in logging camps?
Oh, that too. Yes, he cooked in Camp 13 for the O&N Lumber Company. Mm-hmm.
Were you in the restaurants at any time when he was cooking?
Actually, I was just a little girl.
Okay. You had a story about candy on the tables.
I don't dare mention names, do I? Oh yes, I love candy, but I like to have candy, but I didn't eat much of it. And I'd have my little brown bag, and I'd carry it with me day after day, and I'd always leave it on the end of a table or a cupboard. And then one day it disappeared. I mean, it was a neighbor boy.
You can use a name there. There's probably not around
anymore.
He
was a real nice, yeah. He was a real nice young man, actually, but I suppose the candy just tempted him. And my dad didn't like any of those boys because of one bad one, as he put it.
What's the memory of your parents? Were they a happy couple? They loved to dance, or what?
Oh, yes.
What do you remember about them?
I remember my mother sitting on my dad's lap a lot, and they'd sing songs. You see, I was 6 years older than the other kids, so I had a lot of attention at that time, and yeah, they'd sing, and they liked dancing, and because they lived way out in the country, and there was this ball. It was a Christmas ball in Owen, and they had a fancy cutter, and they were all dressed up, and they left the house to go to Owen to the dance, and they were no more than probably half a block from our place when they ran into a big snowbank and tipped over, and that was the end of the party.
They come back home again then?
Oh yeah, they came home. It was just, they realized then it was just impossible to keep on going with all that snow. They didn't plow the roads as frequently as they do now. And it seemed like years ago we had a whole lot more snow, though. I don't know if it's because I was little and the snowbanks were awfully high, and now I'm big and the snowbanks don't look so high, but I think we had a lot more snow then because we used to, in the winter time, I suppose we'd have a day that was kind of warm, and our farm had quite a slope to it, and that snow would get crusty. It would just gleam in the sun. It would be hard though. We could put our sleds on that and we could slide for, I bet, a quarter of a mile. We just loved it. And,
I think there was more snow back then,
yeah.
according to some of the reports. Now, you were quite young when your mother passed away.
Yes, I was 9 years old.
Did that put a little more responsibility on you? Or was it?
Well, I suppose the twins were just 4 then, and I suppose it did. I became the boss. I sometimes overworked it, I think. Did I ever tell you about one morning, Margie said, "How do you spell kick?" Have I told this before? So I said, Kick. My grandmother Copus was with us at the time, and all of a sudden, they kept coming at me, and if Margie didn't kick me, Marguerite did. And I got kicked in the leg pretty hard, and I started to cry, just as Dad came in. And he says, "Well, what's going on here?" And I'm crying, and I said, "They're kicking me." And when he went to hug me, he saw this, they had pinned that "kick me" on my apron and bow tie. And I'll never forget it, because here I am feeling very sorry for myself, and my dad laughed.
Now, you mentioned that you had twin sisters.
Yeah, they were 4 when my mother died.
And their names were?
Marjorie and Marguerite.
Okay, and they were born about 1920?
20.
1920. You had another sister too, I believe.
Yes, Catherine was born on the 10th of February, and my mother died the 26th of February.
As you were growing up, where did you go to school?
Well, I've gone to so many schools.
What's the first school that you went to?
I think the one west of the Black River was called Oakvale. So I graduated in the 8th grade from the Oakvale School, which by that time was a new school built across from the Hiller's Cheese Factory. That would be 3 miles west of Withee on X. It wasn't called X then, I guess, but it was the old Yellowstone Trail. I remember that because I thought that was such a pretty name. I graduated the 8th grade there. And then in high school, I was a freshman and a senior in Withee, but I was a sophomore and junior in Owen because of my dad moving.
This made you a graduate of both schools then. Do you remember any of your teachers?
Well, Mr. Munchall was our principal when I was a senior in Withee. I don't remember too much about him, but I tell you, when I was a freshman, though, in Withee, Carl Johnson, the kids, a lot of them didn't like him. He was very strict, a very smart man, and he was a friend of my dad. My dad, I don't know how they became acquainted, but he was an excellent teacher. But he was very strict. Most kids didn't like him. For some reason or other, I did. I liked him, and I learned. But, of course, I always remember Ralph Emerson and Clayton Bone were 2 boys from the, it was called Emerson's Corner then, a mile west of the Black River Bridge, and then you turn south, about 2 miles. It was called Emerson's Corner at the time. There used to be a cheese factory and a store there. And Walter Emerson lived there, and Clayton Bone was a neighbor. If you remember, Edna and Lucius Bone had a restaurant. Well, it was Lucius' youngest brother, and he was a little devil. They made a good pair, and they fooled around an awfully lot. And the reason I'm saying this is Mr. My teacher.
Jensen?
No, the one we were talking about.
Munchausen?
No.
Carl Johnson?
Yeah. Mr. Johnson said, why is a cloudy day warmer than a cold day? And he asked Clayton, and Clayton says, huh? And he repeated it because he was busy fooling around with Walter. No, I don't know. Well, Walter, answer the question. Well, what's the question? And he said, oh, I don't know. And all this while I'm raising my hand, oh gosh, I knew, And then finally he says, Eleanor, why is a cloudy day warmer than a cloudy day warmer than a clear day? And I said, the clouds form a blanket, and the blanket keeps the warmth of the earth down. He says, very good. It says, boys, it pays to listen. I'll never forget that. I was so proud.
Did some of these other boys play pranks on you in school?
No, they didn't.
In the grade school?
No, not in grade school either. Just in high school. My senior year, that Elmer and Viggo were terrible.
What did they do to you? What were some of the pranks?
Oh, I had the misfortune to sit in front of Elmer's once, and he'd sharpen 2 pencils, and he'd poke me on the cheek, and when you get poked on the cheek, you turn your head, and there's another pencil waiting for me. They were so bad that my dad noticed it, and he said, you tell the boys to stop, or I'm coming and talking to the principal. That's enough of that. You could get lead poisoning. So I said to Elmer, you better quit. My dad's on the warpath. And then I'd sit and cross my feet, and he'd reach down one day and took my shoe. The bell rang. My shoe was out on the fire escape. Things like that, just to get attention.
So, some things that you remember.
That's about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I can remember one, but I don't want you to put it down. We were studying modern history. And it was about the Civil War. See, that's going way back, but it was about the Civil War. And there was an expression in the book about waving the bloody flag. And Miss Peterson, our teacher, Miss Anna Peterson, said that we were to look up that expression, find out what it meant, where it came from. Because that was the only time it was ever mentioned, was in that little article about the Civil War, and it said something about waving under the bloody flag. Well, a couple of weeks went by and nobody found anything. Well, then, I don't know, I just probably sheer accident, I did find something, and I don't remember a thing about what I found out, but I came to school, and in class that morning I raised my hand right away and I said, I found something. And she says, and we talked a little bit, and she says, well, Eleanor, what did you look up under? And I said, I looked up under the bloody flag, and that was all it took. Oh, I'm telling you, that I don't want, that one.
Now, you mentioned that you were one of the first people to get a permanent in school. What? Anybody make any comments about that, or do you remember when you got your first permanent?
Oh, well, because I didn't want my curls cut after they were growing out long. I had them because I thought they were so pretty, and in our school paper, they wrote they wished that Eleanor Warrenke would get rid of her curls, get rid of her childish curls. That's about it, I guess.
Yeah. Did you have any pets as a child?
Any what?
Any pets?
No, not really. We did have a little colt that we called Baby, and we made a pet of her until she got too big, and when we didn't have something for her, she'd nip us in the back.
Mm.
So then Dad said, "Enough of that." No, we wanted a puppy real bad, and Dad didn't want us to have a dog because he was afraid. Our house was so close to the road, and he says that dog would run out there, and you kids would probably get run over. Well, Dad belonged to the Farmers Union, and Mr. McKern, our neighbor, picked Dad up, and they went to the meeting. Well, we thought we'd go down to McKern's because they had puppies, and it was just a little farther than over to Victor's garage. We walked down to McKern's, and Mrs. McKern says, "Well, if you girls would like a puppy, you can have one." Well, now she shouldn't have done that, but we brought a puppy home, and we were in bed, and we put the puppy in a box behind our kitchen stove. We didn't know really what to do, but that's what we did. And as I remember my dad telling it later, we had been very sick that winter. First, my mother had died, and then the twins got a light case of. I got scarlet fever, and then the twins got scarlatina, and there was a lot of crying, I suppose, because the kids were sick, feverish, sore throats and stuff. And my dad came home from the Farmers Union meeting, got ready for bed, and he said he heard this whimpering, that little crying sound, and he jumped out of bed. He was sure it was one of the kids sick, and here's that puppy. And we didn't have it very long. We were eating dinner, and Dad looked out the window, and he says, "You girls stay right here." And he got up, and he went out, and of course, we went to the window, and we saw the puppy, was falling down and running, and stuff coming out of its mouth, and my dad went and got a shovel, and he didn't want us to see. He just tapped it on the head, and it was gone. But I guess I don't know what it had. If it had rabies or some dogs, they say, would get sick. It wouldn't be rabies, but they'd act like that too. But that was the end of our puppy. We didn't have it very long.
Okay, as you were growing up, and what kind of occupations did you have?
I was a waitress. At first I was a waitress, and then I went to Teledyne Post. This is after I was married that I went to Post Company, and I became an imprinter and worked there for 25 years.
And what did you do imprinting on?
All drafting materials like scales and triangles. Scales are what the average person calls a ruler, but these were three-sided scales. And then plastic, that had to be imprinted too, and then plastic triangles and curves, all architectural pieces.
While you were there, did you ever, give suggestions? And
one beautiful one, and I got $100 for it. I got a few awards through the years, 25 here, 25 there, but the big one was the $100 one, when I suggested, instead of 2 operations for running of 1,000, say, scales or triangles, just to put a letter that indicated a year on a piece of plastic, and doing it in 2 operations. I asked why they couldn't put the die in with the main object, and I got $100 for it.
It's a good suggestion.
So I thought that was pretty nice. Well, it saved a lot of time, and it saved ribbon.
Where did you waitress? Could you describe where the restaurant was?
The Keefs, Mr. and Mrs. Keefe, were cooks for the Onan Lumber Company, and they cooked at the company boarding house. The boarding house is part of what Badger Shooters is now, uh, the building extended to the south where Mary Ellen Hughes lives now. That was a big eating place for the millmen. You know, they didn't travel back and forth. I don't know where they slept, but they slept somewhere, maybe in the horse barn. Used to all of that part of Owen was horse barns. That and they built this little roundhouse, and it was round. Even the tables were curved to fit the curved sides of the little roundhouse, and they were both excellent cooks. And I worked with them for 4 years, and then I got married.
Where was this located?
Uh, just the second building as you turn up Owens Main Street on the east side of the street.
Okay, right, kind of north of the OW Sports?
Yes.
Right in there. It's no longer there, but that's
No.
where it would have been.
But it was, it was known. The salesmen just loved to come there. Like I said, they were good cooks, and the Northern States Power Company men, when they were in our area, they always came there. Mr. Keefe was very generous, and he loved to bake beans. And they had one of the old company stoves, a great big thing. Gosh, again, as long as my table and wide, probably nine holes on it, and a great big oven. But he would soak the beans during the day, and then he had some kind of pork and molasses and sugar and stuff. He'd let them bake slowly all night in the oven. And these men just love those. And no matter what they ordered, they always got a little bowl of beans. And then he'd come in and he'd say, "Well, how are the beans?" And of course, he knew they were good. And then he'd go and refill the dishes. It was nice.
Yeah, working men appreciated that.
Oh, yeah.
During this time, what type of recreation did children play, or did, even as you were growing up, what did you do for entertainment?
Baseball. We played a lot of baseball. Annie over, and we had teams. We had fights.
Did you play hide and go seek?
Well, yeah, we played hide and go seek.
Where did you play it?
Well, we got lost in a cornfield one time, I remember. We weren't supposed to play in the cornfield in the first place. It was real close to our farm buildings and our driveway, and it was at our place, too. And I was one of them that got lost.
They apparently did find you, though.
Yeah.
Did the neighborhood have birthday parties? They celebrated birthday parties?
We had birthday parties. 3 families in a row were all cousins, and they loved coming to my place. My dad was a good baker, good cook. I always had a very good birthday cake. One of my cousin's mothers was a good cook, but she burned things. Mostly she burned bread, though, the crusts on the bread. She got a new stove. It was a gas stove, something quite new. And her bread was always burned on top. I remember that. But otherwise, everything she made was so good. And my other aunt, she wasn't the best cook, but everything she made was pretty. But my dad was a good cook and baker.
Now, did you have homemade ice cream?
Pardon?
Did you have homemade ice cream?
Only when we borrowed the neighbor's freezer, and that was good. Between the strawberry season and when peaches got ripe, we would have it, and we'd have strawberries and peaches. Oh, kids loved coming to my birthday party because my dad would get it for my birthday. That was a treat because, none of us got to town very often, and so ice cream was a treat.
Did you, what was the first movie you ever saw?
Frozen Justice. And I thought I would never forget the lady that played the lead part, but I have forgotten. I saw it in Thorpe. I went with a neighbor girl. Her sister lived in Thorpe, and I asked Dad if I could walk with her, and he says, "Yes, but you girls, that's a long ways, and you got to be home before dark." And we did. No, no, no. That's another time. I'm getting mixed up. We walked to Thorpe to visit her sister. Yes, and her little boy got into the cupboard and spilled the molasses all over the floor. I remember that. So we quietly left and went home. And seeing Frozen Justice in Thorpe. I don't remember how we got there, but that was my first talkie. I just couldn't believe it. I can't remember the lady though. I didn't think I would ever forget that.
As long as we're talking about first, when do you remember the first time that you voted, for whom you voted?
Well, I think I voted for Calvin Coolidge, but I don't know whether if that's really it or not. No, I'm sure it wasn't, because we were talking about. I think the reason that Calvin Coolidge stays in my mind is the fact that the teacher that we had at that time stressed the fact that he lost a son that died of a ruptured appendix, and I think he was president at the same time that there was a Floyd Collins that lost his life in a cave in Kentucky, and she brought a article about it, and we discussed that a lot. So
probably as a student you were discussing it, but
yeah.
by the time that you were eligible to vote,
yeah.
Probably Roosevelt was in office at that time.
No, I don't think so. Well, see, Coolidge, no, because I was in grade school yet. I was probably a 7th, 8th grader when Coolidge was. So probably Roosevelt would be the first one. It must not have made a big impression. I don't remember. Well, good Lord, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, how about your first car ride?
Oh, Lordy. With my uncle, and in the back seat, and I got car sick. And I would get car sick real often. Well, not every time we went for a ride, because I didn't ride very often, I should put it that way. I'd always get so car sick. Throw up.
How about your first airplane ride?
Well, I was married, and we were going to Florida, and there was a man. Carl sat next to the window. I was in the center, and then this gentleman on the outside. And I'm sitting there like this, I suppose. He says, "You're afraid, aren't you?" And I says, "Kind of." He says, do you know what the most dangerous part of this ride is?" And I was really scared then. He says, "It's to and from the airport." Meaning the traffic is bad.
When did you first see television? Your first television?
Oh, Sue must have been about a junior in high school, because she was driving, and we'd gone to Marshfield. And while we were gone, Carl said, "I'll get the TV." And coming home from Marshfield, we ran in a snowbank, and we had to have our car pulled out. And she says, "Do you think Daddy'll not get the TV now, because that was an expense?" I says, "No, I'm sure that Dad knows that this was an accident. You didn't do this on purpose." And we got home and the TV was there.
Kind of a reward.
Yeah.
When there were a number of doctors in the area, do you remember who the doctors were that were in this area?
Dr. Kais, and then Dr. Dyke, and Dr. Legault.
Were some of these in the Withee area or some in the...
Dr. Kai's, I would say, was associated more with Withee. I think he lived in the High Bridge area, you know. But yes, he doctored, and Dr. Legault had that little hospital for a while. You know, it was where the Maple Manor is now. It was a hospital. And Dr. Dyke was here for years. Dr. Dyke was a surgeon in World War I. His wife was a nurse, Queenie.
Do you remember any home remedies that were used for, let's say, if a person had a cold?
The old standby. We kids would rather have kept the cold than to have to take it. But my dad cooked sliced onions, vinegar and brown sugar till it made a thick syrup, and the onions they were just all soft. And as much as we hated it, it really, whatever's in it, did the trick. We had a neighbor, a bachelor, and he was next to pneumonia, very, very ill. In fact, he couldn't even do his chores, and my dad made a batch of that, and Chris didn't want to eat it, and Dad says, "You're going to eat it," and he stayed there and made him eat until he just couldn't, and then he went back later on and made him finish the pan, then he made some more, did it. That was our cold remedy.
Have you ever tried that now when you had a cold?
No, never. I'll take an aspirin.
Do you remember anything about Pearl Harbor or VJ Day, any of those particular special events?
There were a group of us who were going to have a venison steak supper, and I was to bring 2 pies. And it's late afternoon, and I'm just taking my pies out of the oven. In fact, I had taken one out, and the other was on the rack. And I'm leaning over to take it out, and my dad calls from the living room and says, "Eleanor, the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor." And I said, "Well, where's Pearl Harbor?" You know, I had no idea. And yes, I remember that. And then that was quite a shock, because 2 of the Catnall boys were on this ship in Pearl Harbor, and their 2 brothers were to be at the party that night. You know, they were with us, you know, their venison supper. So about all we did was grab a bite and run to the radio. It was a small radio, and we were always hovering around the radio listening for news. And well, that was it.
Which of the 2 Catnall boys were there?
James and Robert.
They were in Pearl Harbor at that
time? Oh,
time?
yes. They were. I knew the ship. I'm not going to say now because I could be wrong. But yes, they were at Pearl Harbor. That's why everybody was so concerned. But they were okay.
That's a good thing. I think this is almost similar part of this too. Just recently we had Fort Hood had a...
well, that's where my grandson is.
Your grandson's name is?
Michael Nemi. He's a helicopter pilot. And I haven't heard from them. Just that when I called Wanda, she says, "Nanny, I can't tell you anything, but after 4 hours, Michael called and said he's on his way home." So they were locked in. The base was closed. That's all I know about it.
But he was safe anyway.
Yeah, he was safe.
That was a good thing. That was a big concern. You were married for quite a few years.
Yes.
What was your spouse's name?
Carl Henry Reiber.
And when did you get married?
1936.
And where were you married at?
We were married in Carl's folks' living room.
Did you have a dance after your wedding?
No.
Let's see, where was Carl born at?
Gardner, Illinois.
In 1909.
09.
And you were married 58 years?
If that's what it says.
What occupation did Carl have?
He was a bricklayer. That was what he loved doing mostly. He did farm, but he loved his brickwork. He learned to lay brick from his uncle in Illinois. He spent a lot of time in Illinois as a young man, and his uncle was a contractor.
Now,
That's the only place the Riber name is in lights.
you had a couple of children. Would you tell us what their names are and what kind of occupations they had? What did they do?
Sue Marie Riber.
She married
Emil Nemi,
Junior,
and she was a registered X-ray technician, and worked. She trained at St. Mary's Hospital in Wausau, which is no more, but then she worked at the Lake Worth General Hospital in Florida for many years. And Tom was in the Navy after high school, and then he finished school in Eau Claire, and then went on to become electronic engineer for Pratt Whitney Aircraft out of Miami.
Okay, sounds like they both had good occupations.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. What organizations did you belong to?
Band Mothers and
Friends of the Old School?
Oh yes, I forget about them. I'm not very active this past year.
Church?
Congregational church. I've always been active in that.
I know you were a volunteer at the Clark County Healthcare Center.
Yeah.
That was greatly appreciated. Were you an Eastern Star member?
No. Carl was a Mason, but I never.
I knew. Well, to what do you owe your longevity?
I have no idea. I've never given it a thought, really. All of a sudden, I'm pretty old.
But still in pretty good health. That's a very sharp mind. If you were to give advice to young people today, what would you like to tell them?
The minute you feel you're doing something wrong, stop. I just it's hard to tell anybody what to do, but they always say let your conscience be your guide. And I, for one, in our circumstances, I always felt that if we could behave, we wouldn't worry our dad. I always had my dad on my mind. I didn't want to cause him any more worry. For a young child, that's a lot of responsibility. 4-year-old twins, and they were a handful. It's hard to tell anybody what to do. Well, you can't really. I just feel if you have to hesitate about doing something, stop and think. Don't do it until you think it out.
I think that's very good advice.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to thank you for participating in our oral history for the Withee Public Library, and you are a valuable part of our area history, and we thank you for sharing your past with us. This is information that is not in any history book, and so it's what life is really about.
Well, I hope that it doesn't sound too, I'm at a loss for words, but I just hope that it's interesting enough for someone to read.
I'm sure it will be. Thank you.